welcome to this installment of Labor Live at 12:05, your weekly lunchtime stream every Thursday during Labor Month, where we're covering a wide variety of issues that impact working families. And just want to remind everyone that we're live. We're doing this right now in the moment. So feel free to interact with the video. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to put it in the chat. We can pull it up on the live. And again, thanks so much for being with us. So this week is the third week of Labor Month, and we are talking about attacks on working families, from corporate greed to union busting to right to work laws. We're talking about everything that corporate interests are doing to attack working families, not only here in Alaska, but across the country. And today we are talking about the switch from defined benefit pensions to 401ks. And I am so excited to introduce our special guest, Dan Doonan, who is the Executive Director of the National Institute on Retirement Security. With the Board of Directors, Dan leads the organization's strategic planning, retirement research, and education initiatives. Dan Doonan has more than 20 years of experience working on retirement issues and has a lot of experience from different vantage points, from being an analyst to a consultant to a tier and even a defined benefit pension plan trustee. So Dan, welcome to the program.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you. And as luck would have it, we actually did some work looking at this situation in Alaska between the move from defined benefit and towards more of a 401k system, and how that impacted retention and work in the workforce more broadly.
Yeah, so I know, kind of, if I have my history cap on correctly, the state of Alaska switched from a defined benefit pension for its public employees. That includes teachers, firefighters, public safety officers, a whole swath of workers back in 2006. And maybe there was kind of this notion that this was kind of like a turning point in the country, that, if Alaska switched, other states would follow. Did other states happen to follow Alaska's lead?
So, it wasn't entirely unreasonable to think that might happen back then. But given what we were seeing in the private sector, right? Private sector was moving away from offering pensions. And that really never followed suit in the public sector. Today is really the only state that doesn't offer its teachers a pension. Some states have, implemented various changes or sort of set benefits different for the next generation. But every other state either provides a pension or offers it as an option. And I think it gets a bit murkier when you look at other groups. Police and fire tend to be in a lot of local plans, so it's hard to get national data that's perfect there. But we know about 90% of public workers are participating in a pension. We know public safety tends to be on the, above the median or the mean public sector worker in terms of having access. And in fact, recently, the city of Jacksonville, Florida, moved to reopen their pension. They offered a pension until 2016. It was closed. They were finding they're bringing officers and firefighters in and training them, and they were moving on to other nearby cities to work where the benefits were more attractive. So, I think you look at these issues, and the public sector has really embraced this workforce model. They may not pay as much as the private sector, but having that retention means you're hiring less people, you're training less people, and there's really a lot of unique work in the public sector where you can't find an equivalent job or someone to hire with those skills in the private sector too.
Right. And just to make sure I heard you correctly and that our viewers heard you correctly, Alaska, we pride ourselves in being one of the only states that do a lot of things. I would argue the most beautiful state. I could list other facts that we're very proud of, but we are the only state that does not offer a defined benefit pension option to teachers.
That's right. And, on top of that, there are states where teachers are in Social Security and there's states where there's not. And teachers in Alaska aren't in Social Security either. So the situation is pretty dire in terms of there's no guaranteed monthly payment from Social Security if you're not working in a Social Security job. And without the pension, you're putting all of that risk, the entirety of it, on the worker themselves.
Mhm.
And, you know, when these changes were made, retiree healthcare was trimmed for this same class of workers as well.
Right.
So, you know, it is a fairly fraught situation in terms of teaching in Alaska and getting prepared for retirement.
Yeah, that is honestly kind of just wild to hear that we are the one outlier in the country in this one area and such an important area. And maybe before we kind of continue with the questions that I was thinking about, I think it might be helpful if maybe in like a one or two sentence, if you could just explain what a defined benefit pension is and how it differs from what people know a 401k is, just so we
Sure.
all are understanding the same thing.
Sure. I'll start with the easy one. A 401k is basically a savings account. There's investment options the worker chooses. And post retirement, the worker's on their own. They got to figure it out how to turn that
Right.
into income. Pensions are pooled systems. The contributions are made, the money's invested, and the system itself manages that money post retirement. So you end up getting a check for life. Like every month, you'll get paid a certain guaranteed amount.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think that's a good understanding and kind of rolling back into these questions of, you know, why does a defined benefit pension matter to state and public workers? Like what is the benefit to them?
Yeah, and you know, I think I ought to note, public sector often pays a little bit less for comparable work, but
Right.
they build loyalty with their workforce by providing good benefits,
Mm,
right? And the benefits really incentivize people to stick around and stay and have a career instead of a job. But pensions are really a user-friendly way to receive retirement benefits. It doesn't require you, you know, retiring at the right time when the market's up or knowing how to manage money post-retirement without making big mistakes. So it's very user-friendly, and you know, particularly for workers who aren't in Social Security, that gives you some basic guaranteed income that you can earn.
mhm.
So, you know, I think for workers, this is a huge service. When you have a pension system run on their behalf, you know, it's an incredible service, relieves the stress, you know, it's going to be there. Um, and, you know, it's an efficient way to provide benefits too.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned, right, like a defined benefit pension is part of like this kind of trade-off between the public and private sector that workers might not get paid as much working in
Yeah.
in the public sector, but they do it because they probably have, you know, a value on delivering public goods, but also they kind of get this assured retirement that when they're done working for the government that they'll still be able to enjoy their livelihoods after retirement, which I think we can all hope is a goal for all of us. But kind of beyond public workers, state workers, why do defined benefit pensions matter to the rest of us? I don't work for the state. A lot of my friends don't work for the state. Why is the defined benefit pension for public employees important for me?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, you know, recognizing that your state and local government provide a lot of services, you want those services to be done well. We're talking about our schools, keeping communities safe, safe roads. Um, you know, there was even articles about Alaska being backed up on processing food stamps because of the lack of
Mm,
workers, right? So Alaskans are missing out on federally funded benefits because there's not enough people, you know, working there to really process the claims in a timely manner. You know, a lot of public sector work is vital to communities, and when it's done well, it's often invisible, right? You can take it for granted,
right.
but someone's out there doing that work. You know, I think it really isn't a difficult issue. If a business couldn't get workers or they wanted to improve retention, they would change their offerings so they could solve that problem.
Right.
Um, at the end of the day, high turnover, having a lot of people leaving the job because, you know, they're moving on somewhere else is a major cost in itself.
Mm,
So it impacts the quality, and then the cost component. And this is what really usually doesn't get accounted for or scored. If you have higher turnover, you're paying more to recruit people, to train them, and you
right.
have more inexperienced people on the job.
I mean, I think, you know, the last thing that we want as an Alaskan, you know, I don't want an inexperienced teacher in my child's classroom, or I don't want an inexperienced police officer coming to solve, you know, come to me in my time of need. Obviously, you know, we need new people into these employee groups, and you're always going to have experience and less experienced people. But I think we all can all agree we all want the most qualified workforce that the state can get, because we all really do rely on it. So I think that's a really excellent point that you brought up.
Yeah, if I could follow up,
Yeah.
We looked at projected service for a new hire in Alaska versus other states in the Pacific Northwest. And other states, when they hire a new teacher, they're on average getting between 11 and 19 years of service per teacher. So that's a
Wow.
lot of retention. It's not normal in our economy these days because private companies don't incentivize retention the same way. But
Right.
Alaska is averaging about 6 instead of that 11 to 19 years. So there's a lot more churn. There's a lot more hiring that needs to be done to keep people, filling the classrooms and doing that work.
Right. And it's interesting you mentioned 6 years, or that happens to be kind of like the average of teachers, because from what I do understand, 401k vestiture in Alaska, maybe that depends district to district, but is around 5 years.
Yeah, I think the vesting is 5. It doesn't mean everybody leaves right at 6, but the
Right.
average, on average, you're going to get about 6 years per new hire.
Right.
Some will stay for a long time. Some may work 1 year. But what we're trying to do is pull it into sort of a return on investment for hiring, right? And
Right.
look at it in those terms. And, a state getting 15, 19 years per new hire, you don't see that very often these days. But,
Right.
it's part of that incentive that people respond to. There's a financial benefit, right, to get that pension.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of jumping into today, like where we're at now, I know that a bill passed the Senate this last legislative cycle, SB 88, sponsored by Senator Kathy Giesel here at Anchorage, and co-sponsored by a lot of people in the Senate. Can you tell us where that's at now? Like what is going on with kind of the current attempts to revitalize a defined benefit pension plan for public employees here?
Yeah. So it's often talked about as returning to pensions. And in a sense, that's right. But when other states made changes to their plans after the Great Recession, they didn't just get rid of their pensions. A lot of them changed how they do pensions. And specifically, a lot of states tried to balance the risks. So with pensions, the funding risk was all on the employer side. Then we see a move to 401ks, all that risk, all the responsibility is on the workers. But a lot of new pension tiers that were built across the public sector in the lower 48 really aim to balance those risks between the employer and employees. And that's really what the proposal that the Senate passed last year aimed to do. And a couple ways that it aimed to do that, post-retirement, they're funding the plan assuming they will provide cost of living increases. But if the plan's finances deteriorate, they can skip those increases, giving the plan essentially good news financially.
Right.
But that's retirees being part of, sharing in a difficult moment, sharing that risk. Similarly, workers would be paying into the plan out of every paycheck. But if the plan's financial status deteriorates, they might pay a little bit more in. And, so you can think of it as like 3 ways of spreading risk with the workers, with the retirees, then the new tier over time.
So it sounds like, and I think I've heard this phrase used a couple times by the senator that proposed the legislation, that this new pension is not the pension of your grandfather. It's not the pension of your tier 1 state of Alaska employee, tier 2, or even tier 3. So we're changing the system so we don't come anywhere near close to what maybe happened in your previous pension systems that the state of Alaska had.
Yeah, and if there is a down market, all of this doesn't go on to say a worker in a 401k, right?
Right.
If you were approaching retirement in 2008, that was going to have a big impact on individuals. So like investment risk is going to be there. It's really about how we manage it, and do we have a system to deal with that? And the bill really said, okay, everybody's going to have a part in this. And I think the important thing to understand when you build a system that way, it really is going to align the incentives of everyone involved, right? Are you going to care about the pension plan being funded if you have no stake in it? Well, it may not be your top priority, but if you might pay more as a worker or lose a COLA as a retiree, I think everybody will be focused on the same thing, which is really keeping that system strong so it does what's intended to do.
Well, to me, this just sounds like common sense. I mean, I'm sure I understand that there's probably maybe a lot of people that have their own ideas, and maybe that's shaped by previous history with defined benefit pensions. But from what I'm hearing from you, the current pension plan is kind of both sides, both management, i.e., the state, and workers, kind of coming together and say, "Hey, look, we can share the risk. Let's both go in on this together, so we can retain quality public sector workers, because we all know in Alaska that we need them, whether you're running the ferry system or you're administering SNAP benefits or you're part of the search and rescue of the Alaska State Troopers that has to go out at all hours of the night to find people that are going through emergencies. We all want to retire with dignity, and this is kind of that maybe grand bargain compromise between everyone that we could all share a little bit of the pie, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of pensions out there, and they tend to be done a little different in the private sector, the multi-employer space. But the trend is certainly across the board. The trend is to look more at models where it really is feasible and serves all parties. So I think we're going to continue seeing interest in that space as well.
Perfect. Well, this has been, I think, a really informative conversation for me, and hopefully informative conversation for our viewers. Returning public employees to a defined benefit pension has been one of, if not the number one goal of the Alaska AFL-CIO since probably 2006. And it's something that we're going to keep fighting for every single year until we get this darn thing across the finish line. So, Dan, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Thanks for all of your help that you've given the Alaska Public Pension Coalition and your expertise and analysis. It's been incredibly helpful, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. So thanks for coming on the program.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, everyone, that is the end of this week's Labor Live, but tune in next week. We're going to be talking about why it's important for union members to get involved in the electoral process. Politics, love it or hate it, your job and your paycheck and your benefits are on the table every election cycle. So we're going to be talking about why it's important for union members to vote and why it's important for union members to come out to get out the union vote. So again, thanks for joining us, and tune in next week, next Thursday at 12:05.